Good evening. Hello, anybody home out there tonight? All right, let's make a little noise to get things started. Good evening and welcome. I'm John Cox, president of Cape Cod Community College, and I am delighted that the college is co-sponsoring this event with the Cape and Island Suicide Prevention Coalition. Definitely timely and beneficial for all of us. As we get started, let's take a moment to turn to your neighbor and say hello and maybe give that virtual peace sign as we get started and we build that pleasant, stimulating environment we talk about to foster wellness. All right, I'm watching to make sure you're all saying hello down there. Okay. All right, well, that was pretty good. I'm really delighted that you're here this evening, and as we begin, I want to recognize the time that we've spent navigating the global pandemic for well over 2 years. The ramifications on our mental well-being have been significant, and in many cases, far too often, devastating. In fact, mental health issues and concerns have often been referenced as our second pandemic. The increase in death by suicide across our region is alarming. It's imperative that we come together as our community to understand, to address, and to do what we can do to improve our own wellness and that of our broader communities. This evening, I'm honored to introduce Dr. Sally Spencer-Thomas, an innovator in social change and suicide prevention. She's helped start multiple large-scale, gap-filling efforts in mental health and is the lead author of the National Guidelines for Workplace Suicide Prevention. Dr. Spencer-Thomas currently serves as the Executive Secretary for the American Association of Suicidology and the President of the United Suicide Survivors International. Ladies and gentlemen, in a second, I want you to join me in a warm welcome for Dr. Sally Spencer-Thomas.
Imagine this. You're in a dark room. There are no windows. There are no doors. There's no way out. The air is stale. The taste in your mouth is like bitter coffee. This is what it feels like when you have significant depression and suicidal despair. This is what I felt like when I went through an episode of depression. But now, let's think about what if. All right, go ahead and bring the lights up. Albert Einstein failed his freshman entrance exam. What if that huge disappointment led him to think about suicide and instead of going on to make his discoveries? Marie Curie, some of you might remember her from your high school chemistry class. What if she, after her mother died and she was hospitalized for that grief, what if she had gone on to take her life instead of going on to win 2 Nobel Prizes in science? Dr. Martin Luther King, we're learning more and more about his young experiences with suicidal intensity. And what if those thoughts led him to take his life instead of going on to being such a big part of the momentum behind the civil rights movement? And even William Shakespeare, right? To be or not to be. Many people don't know what his young adulthood crisis was, but he and his girlfriend found themselves unexpectedly pregnant. What if that major life transition led him to consider suicide instead of going on to write his masterpieces? Now, this campaign was called Don't Erase Your Future. And it was developed by everyday people, men and women and faculty and students who sat around a table at the University of California, Irvine, and said, we must change the conversation that we're having about suicide. And that's why we're here. Because we need you, all of you, working together in partnership to change the conversation that we're having here on the Cape and Islands. All right, I have a couple of housekeeping items of my own, and the first is what we call an acknowledgement of country. I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the original custodians of the land on which we are today. And according to my research, those would be the Wampanoag and Nauset people. I'd like to pay respect to their elders in the past, for they have laid the foundation for us to walk, as well as the elders of today who carry forward the stories and traditions. I'd like to acknowledge any Indigenous people here with us today. We, as non-Indigenous people, have much to learn from the oldest living cultures on Earth. And while that's a really important thing to do for a whole host of reasons, it's absolutely tied to our conversation today. You see, because young Indigenous men in particular, from all over the globe, have some of the highest suicide rates you'll find anywhere. And when we trace it back and try to figure out what happened, we can always find a connection back to what happened to their grandparents and their great-grandparents when they were forcibly removed from sacred lands. So absolutely tied today. I'd also like to acknowledge all people in the room who have lived experience or lived expertise with suicide. There's people in here perhaps who have lost loved ones to suicide. Others of you who have walked shoulder to shoulder with people who are fighting to stay. And some of you may have also experienced your own suicidal intensity. And sometimes in a talk like this, feelings or memories come up. And maybe today is not the day for you to re-experience those. So if you find yourself midway through going, not so sure, it's okay. Your self-care is most important. If you do need to step away, we just ask maybe if you let Mara know. Mara, raise your hand. There she is. And that you have a self-care plan. She will take good care of you. I'm in the different social media spaces. If anybody wants to connect, please do. I love to hear from you. I love to hear what you're doing and what you're thinking and what your questions are. And any feedback you have for me, I'll be really, really excited to hear. I do have a TED Talk called Stopping Suicide with Story. And I truly believe, and also know from a bunch of brain science, that storytelling is one of our most powerful, under-leveraged tools that we have in our suicide prevention toolbox. All right. So you heard a little bit about my very boring formal bio, but I'll talk a little bit more about the real goal here for a second. I was born and raised in Connecticut, just down the street. I actually spent some really formative years in Massachusetts and Cape Cod and the islands. My grandparents lived in East Dennis, and I spent 3 college summers waiting tables on Martha's Vineyard. So I love it out here, and it is coming home in so many ways. But in 1990, I moved out to Colorado to go to graduate school, and I got off the plane, and I looked west, and there were mountains, and then angels descended. Whoa! And Colorado is the place for my soul. So I moved out, and my whole family moved out behind me, including my 81-year-old grandfather from East Dennis. This is my husband. He is a Gulf War-era Marine, and and I worked at the Boston VA Medical Center for a year. My husband went through a period in his life. He got laid off from an oil and gas job back in 2015. And that catapulted him into pretty significant depression. And then he had a health issue that took him out of the workforce for a long time. And during that period of time, my husband experienced some suicidal intensity. And I had worked at the Boston VA. I had a number of friends who worked in the Denver VA. And it took our family a solid 6 weeks to get my then suicidal husband to be seen. So for those of you who are here as caregivers and advocates and supports for other people, I get it. I understand how complicated our mental health system can be and how helpless you can feel when trying to navigate it. I'm glad to say he's doing much better today. We're also sitting on the Great Wall of China in this picture. It was taken a few years ago. I do get the incredible privilege of traveling internationally to do this work, and this does a couple of things. One, it's very humbling to see how this issue shows up all around the globe. There are no communities, really, that have been spared from suicide. But the hopeful and inspiring thing is that each community around the world, each region, has their own framework of looking at this issue and their own research questions and their own approaches, and some of them are really different than how we think about and see things here. So it's helpful sometimes to get out of our little bubble and go see what other people are thinking about it, because when we stitch all our quilt squares together, we have a far more robust picture of what's possible. All right, this is my very, very strange self-care practice, which is trying as best I can to run long distances very slowly, very slowly. My kids are like, Mom, we don't know what the heck that is, but that is not running. And I'm like, shut up. My kids are older. I can say shut up to them. I said, like, come on, give me a break. I'm out here trying. A long time ago, I got this silly idea of trying to run a marathon in every state. I do 2 or 3 a year. And then we had COVID, and I had to take 2 years off. So do the math. I'm going to be really old by the time we're done. And I gave up the Boston Marathon dreams a long time ago. So if all goes well, I'll be back June, I think, of 2023 to run Martha's Vineyard Marathon. I'm pretty excited about that. These are my 3 buddies. Nicholas is now 24. How the heck did that happen? And Tanner's 21, just turned 21, and Jackson's now 17. But in this adorable picture, I love it because they're all dressed up. They don't get dressed up very much anymore. And the reason they're dressed up is because they like to come out with me to these very fancy, stuffy fundraising charity galas for mental health causes. And you'd ask yourself, but why? Why would young teenage men want to do this to themselves? It's very boring, very, very boring. Well, I'm on to them. They know I'm going to buy all those silent auction items that they sign up for. They're no dummies. But in all honesty, they used to come out with me because their hearts were moved into the work of mental health promotion and suicide prevention. When they were 6, 4, and 3 months old, because they were in the car with me when I learned about my brother's suicide. And while I don't know that I would have done anything differently, there was no escaping the conversation with my boys. And they went on to do various mental health programs in our faith community and in their schools. And I'm very proud of them for that. And then these are my 2 male pets, all right? So Rocky's the Australian Shepherd. I'm his human, and he's a herding dog. So he's very upset when I go away, but I'll be back soon, man. And there's Gandalf the fancy kitty. So we've got 2 male pets, 3 male offspring, 1 male partner. My vote never wins on movie night. But I wouldn't have it any other way. I'm not going to share a ton of data in this particular talk tonight, but I know that there's a lot of suicide awareness efforts out there that tend to share a lot of data. And so I always want to remind us, because I know, and I know many of you are aware, that statistics are merely aggregate numbers with the tears wiped away. Statistics are aggregate numbers with the tears wiped away. And behind every pie chart and bar graph and statistical significance and percentage point, there's a life that has been lost. There's a family and a circle of friends that have been devastated. There's someone who has suffered so greatly. And there's others who've been wondering at 3 o'clock in the morning, is tonight the night? So before I go on, I want to acknowledge those of you here who have been touched by this issue. And I want to pause, and I want to honor that. And I want to thank you. Thank each and every one of you for turning some of your darkest days of grief and distress and despair into the knowledge and passion and skills to try to help your community. I feel very fortunate to be with you tonight, and I'm grateful you're here. For those of you who have lost first-degree loved ones, I'm with you. This is Carson, my younger brother, my only sibling. He was a 34-year-old business executive, entrepreneur, father of two. And by all external accounts of success, my brother had it going on. He launched a company in his mid-20s. By his early 30s, it had gone national. And he had all the trappings of success. He had the homes and the cars and the clothes and the stuff. He was handsome. He had tons of friends who worshiped him. We called him the Pied Piper. He was very charismatic. They followed him around anywhere. And right alongside that, my brother also fought fierce depression. He was first diagnosed at age 19. My brother, my father, my middle son, and I all went to, and I can actually say the name of the college, and some of you might know it. Nobody knows this college back in Colorado. We all went to Bowdoin College in Maine. And in my brother's sophomore year, he made a bunch of stupid decisions, and he got himself kicked out of school. My dad was just beside himself. Marched my brother's butt promptly into the psychiatrist's office. What's wrong with my kid? The psychiatrist said, I think your son has bipolar condition. And my brother went, whatever. I don't know what that is. I don't have it. I'm fine. Now, this was the late 80s. People weren't talking about this very much. And so my brother set off, and that year he had off from school to show everybody he was just fine. And you know what? He did. My brother got a job, hugely dated reference, selling encyclopedias. Does anybody remember encyclopedias? Okay, we got one, two. Okay, a couple gray-haired people in the back. Yes, encyclopedias. Do you remember? We thought everything we needed to know was in 12 books. So funny to think of it this way today. But yeah, that was his job. It was a door-to-door salesman job. Not the most awesome job, but he was wicked good at it. Sell the books, and he did. And by the end of that year, he had amassed a sales team in Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. And his little team earned enough points selling these books that they got to go to both Hawaii and Rome as their reward. 19 years old. All right, so my brother finds this gift. He goes back to Bowdoin, gets his little degree, goes down and gets a big fat job at a multinational insurance company in Atlanta. Now, by this point in the story, I'm already in Colorado. I'm doing my little graduate school thing. He's moving from Maine to Atlanta, and I start to see the wheels wobble just a little bit. Now again, hugely dated reference. Back in the day, my brother and I used to communicate. This was before cell phones and before internet and email. Crazy, right? We used to communicate by recording ourselves on cassettes. Anyone? Cassettes? Yeah, a couple of you. Go. Recording ourselves on cassettes and then snail mailing these cassettes in the postal mail back and forth to each other. So he would send me these cassettes, and on them, I heard anxiety. And I heard confusion and self-loathing and self-doubt, stuff I'd never heard from a very confident brother before. And here I am, big sister, baby psychologist out in Denver, and I am sending him stuff back. Now, in graduate school times, I was on a quarter system. So every quarter, we were learning like different approaches and different things. And the professors would come out and say, you know, all that stuff you learned last quarter, it's completely wrong. Here's the new stuff. And so I was just sending him these cassettes back, like, try this. Read this, look at this therapy, try this medication, try this. And he did. My brother tried a whole bunch of stuff to get out of his pain. My brother fought so hard for a really, really long time. And no one knew. No one on the outside knew. All they saw was all this magic and success and all this stuff. And that's how it went on. Now, people in my role often like to put people experiencing mental health challenges into boxes, diagnoses, right? We like to do that, we do. So if we're gonna put my brother in a box, he would have met the criteria for bipolar 2 condition. Now, bipolar is a spectrum disorder like pretty much all health issues. We can have more intense forms and less intense forms, and people can move up, people can move down, people can move off for a period of time. But bipolar 2 condition is the less severe form, all right? So that meant on most days, Carson had what we would call an elevated mood state. Doesn't that sound lovely? Kind of does. Elevated mood state. He was optimistic, energetic, creative, driven. It's where all his leadership skills as an entrepreneur lay. He loved it there. This is absolutely where all his gifts lay. But every once in a while, it was punctuated by crushing depression. And no one loves crushing depression. And when that would happen, he would hole up in his basement, and sometimes he'd self-medicate with alcohol or marijuana, or sometimes he'd venture out for talk therapy or medication, and he would just do whatever he needed to do to feel better, and then he would come back out and no one knew. And that is the way it went for well over a decade. Until the summer of 2004, for reasons we don't fully understand, Carson went way above elevated mood state into full-blown mania. And when someone's in full-blown mania, you know something's not right. My brother stopped sleeping. He left his family, bought $1 million loft in downtown Denver that he didn't have inspected, $80,000 car, laptops for employees he no longer had because he burned bridges with his business partner, which was a mistake. Business partner was the yin to his yang, and my brother just went through his life like a train wreck. Now, at this point in the story, I'm about 16 years into my mental health provider journey. So I know what I'm seeing, and to be completely honest, I am feeling hopeless. I am feeling helpless. I don't know what to do. So I call up all my colleagues, I call up all my friends who have bipolar condition, and I say, help me, give me the magic. How do I reach them? One of the horrible things about bipolar condition is that when people are in the throes of it, they often lose their insight that what they're doing is reckless or dangerous or not themselves and so on. And so I would call him, like, oh, Carson, a lot of big decisions here. Are you okay? And he would say things like, you know what? You don't know me. I don't need you. And then he would hang up. And these conversations went on so long, I'd be a puddle on the floor. My husband finally had to intervene and say, Carson, you just can't call your sister anymore. It's too painful. He estranged himself from all of the ones who loved him the most. For months, I would call up these friends and I'd say, please, give me the magic. What is it that I need to do here? And I got 1 or 2 answers back from my colleagues and my friends who live with bipolar conditions. One of the answers was, well, Leslie's an imminent danger of so or other. And he wasn't. He was just making stupid decisions. And, adults have the right to do that. And then the other one was, you know what, Sally, eventually this train is going to crash. And when it does, just be ready to catch him. He's going to need you. I'm like, well, I don't like that answer either. I don't want him to have horrible consequences from this. But that is what happened. So we can trace it to the day that he met with his accountant, and his accountant said, dude, you're broke. You have no more money. You can get no more money. It is over. And my brother's identity as a successful and wealthy businessman was a big part of how he saw himself, so this was catastrophic news. And almost overnight, he flip-flopped from this agitated, mean, and reckless mania to the worst depression we had ever seen. He lost 30 pounds. He didn't sleep for a month. He had a tremor because he was so agitated. He was like a tortured soul. He moved back in with my parents. And again, 6 months before, on top of the world, leader in his industry. It was a very humbling thing for him. Moved back in with my parents, and in hindsight, I kind of think he came back to say goodbye. He would pace around their living room all night long. We surrounded him with love, got him connected to resources, did all the things. The last time I saw him was a Thursday night. When my kids were little, on Thursday nights, I would take the kids over to Grandma's house, She would make a big meal. My kids got to spend time with their elders. My husband got a night off. Everybody won. So we were all over there that night, and Carson and I pulled away into my dad's study to have a chat. We had all read the book, The Unquiet Mind. It's by Kay Redfield Jamison. If you haven't read it and you're interested in the experience of living with bipolar condition, I really encourage you to read it. She's a professor of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins University, so she's pretty smart. And she knows the clinical stuff, and she knows the research stuff. She also lives with bipolar condition, so she writes like a novelist about her manic highs and her depressive lows, and most importantly, about her trials and tribulations in recovery. And so on that night, he said, tell me about this book. And I said, well, look, Carson, here's another person. She's very accomplished, just like you. She's very public, just like you. And she's gone through some similar things. I don't know, man. There's hope. There's hope. There's hope. And Carson turned to me and he said, but Sally, it's madness. 4 days later, he killed himself. So, of course, he's not here for me to ask him what exactly he meant by that. But I have a pretty good idea. Carson was very determined, persevering, problem-solving man. He'd gotten through some pretty deep depressions in the past. So yeah, part of me believes he succumbed to this overwhelming pain. But I don't think that's entirely it. I believe my brother didn't exactly lose hope that he couldn't get well again, because he had often in the past. I believe my brother lost hope that even if he were to get well again, that he had any chance at all of getting his life back. That his friends wouldn't look at him funny for having a mental health condition, that his business partners wouldn't trust him anymore. And that is the part of our story that gets me all fired up, because it's hard enough to fight this kind of pain without all of the social stuff we do to each other, the prejudice and discrimination and misinformations and myths that prevent us from reaching out to one another, that prevent us from accessing and accepting the life support that's out there. On the night of my brother's death, my brother's good friend Sean called my brother's wife Heather and said, oh my God, what do we do? And she said, no matter what you do, don't let him be forgotten. And so it was that call that set the wheels in motion for Sean. It was literally on the night of my brother's death that he had this wheels in motion, and by January, he had convened our family, my brother's closest friends, to do something in our acute grief. This is not an uncommon story after suicide. We get fire in the belly because no one should die in isolation and despair. Well, it was our story too. So we got on the conference calls. All across the nation we were. And at first there was lots of tears. But then there was lots of laughter because my brother was pretty frickin' hilarious. And pretty soon we resolved to do bold gap-filling work to prevent what happened to Carson from happening to other people. And that has led to a whole bunch of these gap-filling experiences, some of which I will share with you tonight. So where are we going? To understand the experience of suicide intensity a little bit deeper, give you some tools and skills on what to do if you're worried about someone, and really, how do we figure out together as a community how to get upstream from this tragedy and have a full-on comprehensive approach that addresses the grief and trauma of suicide death, the crisis around suicide attempts and near misses, but also how do we help ensure that people have built resilience in the community, family, and individual level so that we can prevent these kind of problems from happening in the first place. All right, so I'm a little baby suicidologist now, and I'm out in the world, and one of the things you learn very quickly is that language matters greatly. And you probably have noticed, some of us in the work, we don't use that phrase committed suicide. Why? Because the phrase emerged out of a time when that idea of suicide was rooted deeply in ideas of sin and crime, right? You commit a crime, you commit adultery, right? So when you get called out often in this world, you change your language quickly. And so I defaulted to completed because I thought that was better. It sounded better. I guess it's slightly better. But completed is kind of like its cousin, successful and unsuccessful. It connotates some kind of achievement. So the litmus test is, if you swap out the word cancer for the word suicide and it sounds a little bit wonky, it's probably because the language you're using around suicide is kind of infused in some of these misinformation and myths and pejorative ideas, right? Because really suicide is just a very complicated public health tragedy, just like cancer. So we'd never say committed cancer, and we certainly would never say successful or unsuccessful cancer, and we definitely would never say, oh, cancer, it's just a gesture. They don't mean it. They're just crying for wolf at that cancer. We would never make those assumptions and those judgments. We would just say, they died of cancer. They're fighting cancer. They've lived through a bout of cancer. Can you already hear how different the language lands? It speaks to resilience. It speaks to honoring. Okay? So that's a small thing that we can all do as a community, is be mindful of this language. Now, sometimes also we get ourselves all worked up around this, right? Oh my God, we have a crisis, right? And I get it. This is life and death. It's scary. But you stay calm. Others get calm. If we can deal with this in a matter-of-fact way, a serious way, but a matter-of-fact way, we're going to be able to open up a lot more conversations than if we come into this with fear. Okay, let's talk a little bit about a model that will help those of you who are new to this conversation understand a little bit more about how people can get here. If you're going to read one book, I really do still, to this day, all these years later, still recommend Thomas Joiner's book, Why People Die by Suicide. He published it back in 2006, I think the original edition was, and it's been poked and prodded by research teams around the world, and it still holds a whole heck of a lot of water. So on the purple bubble, this is what he calls desire for suicide. I think many of us today would say, no, the desire often is more like escape. Not so much that people want to die, but they got to escape this overwhelming pain. Their pain threshold has been exceeded. And it's often made up of these two concepts, which I'll talk about in a second here. But the purple bubble is big. We've got about 14 million people in the US who stare suicide down every year. That is a lot of people. 50,000 people or so die by suicide. 14 million think about it in a serious way. We'll come back to that point in a second. All right, so desire by suicide, desires to escape pain through suicide is made up of these two things. Thwarted belongingness, try to say that 3 times fast. Thwarted belongingness, both words are important. Belongingness, we're all hardwired to be in a sense of community, to have deep relationships with one another. We desire that, we need it from our community hardwiring. When that is thwarted, taken away, or we want it but we can't get it, that increases our despair. So think about the many ways that people lose their connection. Death, divorce, moving, getting kicked out of school, losing a job, incarceration, the list goes on, right? The other one, perceived burdensomeness. Again, both words important. Burdensomeness, I've become such a burden to my community, I've become such a burden to my family, that now I think my death has more value to the people who love me than my life does. A couple of examples. One, let's say there's a financial disruption. Somebody's lost a job. There's bankruptcy, foreclosure, something's happening with the monies of the family. And somebody says, well, if I die, then my life insurance policy is going to kick in, the kids are going to get to keep the house and go to school. Therefore, my death has more value to my loved ones than my life does. That's a common narrative that goes on in someone's head. Now, obviously, that's faulty thinking because someone's life is worth way more than their paycheck. Another one is, I've done something humiliating or shameful. I've brought pain to my family or my community. Therefore, if I go, I take that pain with me. Of course, suicide definitely does not take away pain. It turns up the pain. Another common one is, I have this health issue or I have this mental health issue, and I don't want people to be worried about me. I don't want people to take care of me. And here's a big one for older men, older white men in particular. And I certainly don't want them spending money to take care of me. I become a burden. I don't want them to do that, so I'm going to go. All right, so these are common narratives of burdensomeness. Now, put all that together. Commonly, people have this emerging desire to escape that pain. These are common experiences that people have. 14 million people stare it down, 50,000 people die. Something happens in between here and there. One of the things that we don't talk about often enough is people live through this. And not only do they live through it, they grow through it. In our earlier session today, we had a big talk around resilience and how we grow through the crucibles in our life. People get sober. People have spiritual awakenings. People leave toxic situations, toxic relationships. They find a new job. They find a new partner. They grow spiritually. Like all kinds of things happen in the space where life tests us to the brink. The other thing that happens that prevents people from moving to point A to point B, thankfully, is fear. It's scary. It's daunting by design. So the other part of the equation is what Thomas calls capability. We could call it the I can part. So I want to and I can. There's a certain subset of the population that has what Thomas calls fearlessness. They can stare death down, not afraid. Certain subpart of the population has increased fearlessness. And think about it. A good part of the bubble is not at risk for suicide, and thank goodness that we have these folks, or we would have no warriors, we would have no first responders, no emergency room physicians, no pilots, no entrepreneurs. Oh, and by the way, all those groups have elevated rates of suicide. Why? Because they're less afraid of life and death. They can just stare it down. So when that group gets thoughts of suicide, they have increased risk. So when people are just hardwired, my brother's one of these people, he came into the world a little more reckless. You know, he was always the kid climbing to the top of the tallest tree. My poor parents were constantly running him to the emergency room with broken bones and stitches and concussions and so on. He was a great athlete when he was in high school. He was on 3 varsity sports, super aggressive. When he came out to Colorado, he would try to drag me to the top of the double black diamond runs, and he's like, come on, Sally, come with me. I'm like, no. I like my limbs how they are. I will go down this nice blue cruiser run. I will see you at the lodge. When he was in his mid-20s with $10,000 in his pocket, he went toe-to-toe with the lawyers of a multinational insurance firm fighting for a competing business. Like the kid had no fear. And when it came to his death, no fear. One attempt, fatal. So some people are just hardwired, part of their genetics, a little bit more risk-taking. Second way people have capability, maybe they didn't come into the world this way, but they learned to stare death down because of trauma. Because of their exposure to trauma, they've walked the path. It's a familiar path, life and death. They've already seen it. And again, thank goodness we have so many people who are living through and recovering from traumatic experiences. But trauma is a huge, huge risk for suicide. So, hardwired, learn it. And the third way people have capability is they know what to do. They have what we call access to and knowledge of lethal means. They know what to do. It explains why physicians have such high rates of suicide. It's because they know what kind of medicines can kill them and they have access to those medicines. It also explains why firearm owners have higher rates of suicide. It's not because they have higher suicidal thoughts or feelings. It's because when you have suicide intensity and you have access to a firearm, you're far more likely to die. All right? So where these things overlap, that is where we have higher risk. So when it comes to, well, what do we do about this? Well, on the capability side, there's not a whole lot we can do. We can't change someone's temperament. We can't change the fact that they've had a trauma history. We can do some things around lethal means reduction, but it's hard and it's complicated. Can't take away someone's knowledge, can't take away the fact that they have skills, and trying to battle someone's gun out of their house is not an easy thing to do. But we can do a lot on the purple side. And so if ever you're wondering how to help someone, how to support someone, always go back to the opposite of that. If perceived burdensomeness and thwarted belongingness drive suicidal despair, then usually what people need is purpose and connection. And we'll come back to that too. All right, let's put this in context with our day-to-day. And for those of you who were in my earlier session, this is a little bit of a repeat, but it's important to acknowledge, as President Cox was saying, that we have had a bit of a rough road these last couple years, a bit of a rough road. We have had take you back in time to this time 2 years ago, right? Imagine where you were, picture it in your mind. We heard things were coming. Something was going on in China. We weren't sure what, but it seemed important, but it seemed uncertain. And we got weird. We did. We started hoarding toilet paper, and we were standing in line in Costco and didn't know why. But then it hit, right? Everybody can probably remember something around March 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th. I was on a speaking gig in Long Beach, California, when Italy shut. And I remember getting to the airport, just all I wanted to do was get home and be with my family. Get into the airport, I'm on a Southwest flight from Long Beach to Denver, and there are 3 passengers on the plane. Huge plane, 3 passengers on one of them. And the guy three rows ahead of me is coughing. And I'm like, that's it. I'm dead. Like, there's no way I'm going to survive this. It was super scary, right? So we can all remember that moment in time where everything changed, and we went through this intense heroic phase. People were making masks for one another. They were delivering meals to people who were isolated. People were howling out the window in Colorado every night at 8 o'clock for all of our essential workers. And then we can also, again, put a pin on that. End of May, George Floyd's death, dissent, discontent, violence, disillusionment, conflict for a very long time. And then, January of last year, we started to see a little tick up in our emotional state. Now, this graph is developed by SAMHSA, Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. They're the feds who track all kinds of things related to substance use and mental health. And they made this graph when? Oh, a long time ago, like after 9/11 and Katrina. It is a common pattern that we go through when we are faced with a community disaster. And it certainly fits again today. So several of you might be feeling this roller coaster, I don't know, since breakfast. So Sally, you're talking about 2 years. I went through all those emotions since breakfast. Yeah, you wouldn't be wrong. Yeah, a lot of our intensity, ups and downs, happened in cycles constantly as we went through this. And so we wondered, is this a perfect storm? Is this the perfect storm of stressors? We've got uncertainty, we've got unemployment, we've got all of these catastrophic things, disruption to our milestones in our life. Is this a perfect storm? And then we started seeing the early warning signs of increase in domestic violence calls, huge surges in alcohol and drug use, and child welfare calls actually went down for a period of time because the kids weren't in school and nobody was identifying them as being neglected or abused. And then firearm purchases went up, especially after every social unrest period. And then people wondered, are the suicide rates going to skyrocket? Well, as soon as we could get our hands on the data from 2020, we all took a look. Now we know with a little bit more certainty that actually, no, the rates went down just a little bit, about 3%, which is, a few thousand lives. And people went, wait, what? But those of us in this work knew, like, in the immediate aftermath of large-scale disasters, yeah, suicide rates historically go down. Why? Because of that heroic thing. We tend to pull together during that period of time. But this story is going on. Like, this is not stopping. This has got a long tail. And so we're paying a lot of attention. Now, that little tiny decrease in suicide rates is not the whole story. When you dig into it a little deeper, yeah, the rates overall went down, but not for everybody. Communities of color went up, especially young Black men. Those suicide death rates going down were also offset by a huge surge in overdose deaths and accidental deaths, gray areas for suicide. So the story will go on to tell, but we absolutely need to do something to get in front of all of this. So let me share another parable with you, and that is this one. Imagine, if you will, with me, that you're walking alongside a stream, and it's a beautiful day, unlike today. Beautiful day, sun is shining, birds are chirping, and you're walking along, and oh no, there's someone drowning in the river. Well, you don't wait. You just jump in, and you pull them ashore, and you start doing CPR, and they gurgle and spurt, and they come back to life, and you feel amazing. You just saved someone's life. How cool is that? That's awesome. And then you barely take a breath, and you look over, now there's more people drowning. Well, you can't save them all, so you holler, help me, help me, help me. We got people drowning in the river, and everybody comes running, because that's what we do. When there's a crisis, we come running, and we get in the water, and it's chaotic. And people are thrashing around, trying to save everybody. It's exhausting, and we can't save everyone. I mean, people are just coming down the river, and one after another, and and we can't save them all. They're just floating on by. Well, you get a great idea. Okay, how about this? How about, all right, everybody, we're going to swim upstream a little bit, and we're going to teach everybody how to tread water, okay? Here we go. Well, that sounds good on paper, but you know what it turns out? It's really hard to teach people how to tread water when they're drowning. It's a little hard. Well, you're exasperated. So you jump out of this river and you start running up the banks, and everybody left in the river is like, where do you think you're going? And you say, you know what? I'm going to go upstream and figure out who's pushing all these people in. And that is the mindset shift we need to think about when we think about preventing suicide, all right? Because, yeah, we got to get our best game on downstream. When people are experiencing suicidal loss, and I had a great dinner tonight talking about people that are helping our community with grief and loss. Yeah, it's amazing. We absolutely need to meet people on their worst day and surround them with compassion and help them make meaning out of that crisis. And yeah, when people have suicide attempts or near misses, we got to go surround them with the best treatment possible and with a hopeful and helpful community. But we can't wait until we're down there. We got to move upstream. And when upstream, now I'm talking about first thought. When first thought enters the mind, I need to escape this. I can't do this anymore. Okay, we got you. We've got a buffet of resources, not just one thing, a buffet, because we know not everything works for everybody. And at that point, we need to have a conversation about reducing access to lethal means and what that looks like. Upstream from that, how do we create a culture in our schools, in our faith communities, in our workplaces, where this is what we do around here? We've got each other's back. We've got each other's back. Because peers are going to be far more likely to pick up on changes in behavior, attitudes, and mood than a mental health provider who's behind a closed door all day. It's going to be family members. It's going to be friends. It's going to be coworkers. It's going to be classmates. And how do we empower people to have meaningful conversations in this space? All right. Upstream from that, how do we inoculate people? Give them the tools and resources before the crisis hits. One of the things we do in my little world is that when somebody's in a suicide crisis, we do what's called a crisis response plan. Okay, we actually work with the person to create a crisis response plan when they're in the middle of a crisis. Does that remind you of something else I just said? Teaching people how to tread water when they're drowning? Yeah. We need to do crisis response plans before people are in crisis, so they know what to do, and they're not just thinking about it when they're in crisis, because that changes their ideas about it. We need to develop that before. And then upstream, how do we promote individual and community resilience that allows people that mental muscle to help them bounce back? All right, so this is really a full-day workshop that I do. I'm going to just hit a couple of these highlights, and I'm hoping that I'm going to break you into small groups just to kind of unpack some of these. Now, upstream, again, means how do we bolster protective factors, buffers, right? Because we're all going to go through hard times, and when we do, are we ready? So these are things like helping people usually redefine purpose. Like maybe they thought they were on this track, and that track is no longer an option. How do we help them redefine their purpose? How do we deepen these social connections? Not Instagram flyby stuff, but real, true connections where we're vulnerable with each other, where we open up to one another, we know each other inside and out. How do we improve mental health literacy so we can have these conversations in our workplaces, in schools, without shame, just matter-of-factly? Life skills. For example, one of the life skills that is so connected to suicide, financial health. We do very little to teach our youth about financial health, and so it's not uncommon that by the time they're in their late 20s, they are riddled in debt from school and credit cards and all these other things. And then lived experience stories, one of the other passion projects that we have, is about helping people cultivate their stories as a form of a hero's journey. Nothing to be ashamed of, something to actually be super proud of. You lived through this. You are a different person than when you were when you started this journey. How have you grown through it? So these are all things on an upstream approach that we can do for ourselves and our loved ones, but there's also stuff we need to look at in our communities. What are the social justice issues that are driving despair? It's not good enough to get a whole bunch of quote-unquote troubled people into counselors. We got to look at what's happening in our environment. Bullying, hazing, harassment, prejudice, discrimination, all kinds of job design issues in the workplace. Overwork, underpay, People have food scarcity, housing scarcity, all these kinds of things. So how do we reduce some of these psychosocial hazards? All right, I would like you to find a pair, someone to pair with, and think through what is the community doing right now that is effectively addressing some of these upstream approaches, and also whatever else you want to talk about. So go ahead and find a person to pair with, introduce yourself real quickly, and think about what's happening in the community that's helping bolster upstream suicide prevention and mental health promotion. Go ahead. And for those of you who are streaming live with us, thank you so much for joining with us tonight. I really appreciate you being here. Go ahead and kind of jot down some of your thoughts too. One-minute warning. All right, come on back. I'll give you another opportunity to talk in just a second, but let's pause for a second. And so I'll start, and then I'm going to ask you just in a phrase or two, a couple of words to give me some of the themes of your conversation. So one of a great upstream approach is cultivating gratitude in our communities. And so I'd like to pause and offer my gratitude to this evening. I'd like to give a huge shout out to my colleague and very special friend, Dr. Mara Weir. Can we give her a big hand? Woot, woot. She's awesome and doing a lot of great work here on the campus. So if you're from the campus or involved with the campus, please get involved with the JED campus work that she's helping promote, and Active Minds, a club on campus, Wellbeing Wednesdays. They're going to have all kinds of trainings here. And a shout out to President Cox for supporting this initiative and making it a big part of the community. It's awesome. And giving up this great venue for us tonight. I also want to give a big shout out to the Cape and Island Suicide Prevention Coalition. Round of applause for that crew for supporting this tonight and for all the work that you've done for decades in making this a better place for people's mental health. Can we get one more shout out for our amazing team in the back, Kendra, Brian, and Vana, for making us look awesome tonight. Woot, woot. Thank you. You're awesome back there. All right, so Like a word or a phrase, what were some of the things that came up in your conversations when you talked about upstream approaches in this community? Or lack thereof. Did you have something here? Hard to fund. That's right. That's right. Meanwhile, on the crisis end, you got beans to count. How many people were admitted? How many people died? How many people attempted? It's easier to count events versus, primary prevention is hard to fund. Yeah. Lack thereof, you want to elaborate on that? Whoever said lack thereof? Lack thereof. If you have it, it's hard to get it, hard to find it. Roadblocks to accessing any kind of upstream work. Yeah, go ahead. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes people have a lot of fear, and so there's not a lot of openness around the conversations or education or wellness building or prevention programs. Yeah. All right, let's move on. We're gonna come back to these conversations in a little bit. So one of the upstream approaches that we talked about this morning that I'm gonna keep bringing back because it's so important is this idea of building out your A-team. So work with me now. Again, let's think about for yourselves. Who's your A-team? Like, who are the people who've got your back? Oh, I see. Yeah. To my left and to my right. It's awesome. You brought your A-team with you. So 3 to 10 people who you know you can call in the middle of the night. They're going to come around. They're going to answer the phone. They're going to come by your side. These people you trust deeply. They know the real you. You know, think about who those folks are. Now, if some of you are thinking like, Sally, I don't know if I got any A-team members in my life. I want you to go back in time. It's not uncommon. You're not alone. By the time we hit a certain point in our life and we've been so focused on our jobs and so focused on our families, it's not uncommon that we've lost some of those inner circle relationships. Go back in time. Is there a battle buddy? Is there someone from school, a sports team, a mentor, an auntie, a teacher, somebody who knows the real you? And think about that person. Now, when we're working with people in high levels of distress, getting this A-team mobilized is a really important part of the work. And once you've got that, what do? You get them involved. You notify them. Maybe there's a code word. You can say, hey, if I text you the word gorilla, I need you to show up because I need you. I need you to show up. What does the A-team do? They show up and listen. There's really no secret sauce there. They show up and listen. And yeah, if you're concerned about someone, you can give them crisis resources to turn to if they need some coaching around a plan on how to support somebody. But for the most part, they just show up. That's it. That's what the A-team does. They show up. You can trust them to show up. And they do this thing called non-demand caring contacts. So I want you to do this with me now. Go ahead and pull out your phones. Pull out your phones. And I want you to text somebody. I want you to text somebody on your A-team, somebody who's been on your heart lately, someone that maybe you haven't connected with in a while that means a lot to you, and you're going to send them a non-demand caring contact. All right, what is this thing that I say? Non-demand, which means it's going to be a one-sentence text, but it's not going to be a question. It's not going to be, hey, how are you? Or did you do the thing? Or are we going to do the thing? None of that. It's going to be a one-sentence statement of your care for them. Now, you put this in your own words. I'm going to give you a couple of examples, but you put this in your own words. One sentence. It's very brief. And it's something like this. I'm thinking of you. I care about you. You're on my heart. I see how strong you are. You know, these are a little flowery. I do this training with construction workers. They're like, I would never use those words. But I'm like, you use your own words, okay? I'm looking forward to seeing you. These are very small. You can't read them. But there's a whole bunch of examples of this on the website called Now Matters Now. And they're pretty Pretty powerful. All right, that's it. One sentence text. Go send it to someone on your A team and go. All right, keep going if you're still working on it. You know, back in the day when people's phones were audible, buzzing, beeping, I could tell if people did this, because within 30 seconds to a minute after sending your text, almost always people respond right back. Beep, 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 beep. You know, we get all these buzzes and beeps. And they usually come back, and because this is a kind of a communication people cannot not respond to. And they would come back in one of two ways. Either it'd come back like, hey, dude, are you all right? And that tells me that you don't do this kind of communication often, which is just fine. All good new behaviors have to start somewhere. Or you get back a communication that says, thanks. I really needed that today. Or, I care about you too. Let's do something, right? This kind of communication, especially when it's completely random, is like brain candy. Okay, brain candy, because people go, oh my gosh, I'm seen, I'm known, I'm loved, somebody noticed me, somebody cares about me. It's got to be authentic. And it's best when it's totally unconditional, like not after something happened or an achievement happened or you had a thing or did a thing. No, random throughout the day. The brain goes, oh, love it, all right? So when people are going through difficult, despairing times, you just got to up the ante around non-demand caring contacts. And one of the other ways to do that is to say, you know what I was thinking about today? I remembered the time when. I remember the time when we did this really meaningful thing. And it reminded me how much I love you, man. That kind of thing. Anchor people back in meaningful parts of their life where they felt connected and remind them how much they are valued. All right, let's talk about midstream. Midstream now, we've got problems emerging. They're not catastrophic yet, but just like any other health issue, when the problems are small and we can have a chance of turning things around, it's easier. Right? That's why we do blood pressure checks and we learn to screen for lumps and bumps for cancer. It's because we're trying to figure out the problem when it's smaller. So these are what we're trying to do in that space. I'm going to cover a little bit around gatekeeper training, and Mara has let me know that there's all kinds of trainings come along this semester. There's all kinds of trainings in the community, so we're going to talk about what that looks like. Screening is best when it's self-empowered. Anonymous and confidential, self-empowered screening, just like we do with other health issues. We make mental health part of what we do for our overall health, and we just check in with ourselves every once in a while. You know what? Should I be worried about my drinking? I don't know. Should I be worried about my sleep quality? I don't know. Should I be worried about my mood? Well, let's do a screening real quick and just see. Maybe it warrants another conversation with somebody, right? So ongoing screenings in our community for depression, anxiety, substance use, anger, and so on. We need a full spectrum of help seeking, not one size fits all. When we say, you must go to a mental health provider, that is it, end of story. We put people with their back up against the wall. And we know for some people, you know, I work a lot with men who have traditional norms of masculinity. I work a lot with construction workers, a lot with first responders. These groups have very, very high rates of suicide. And if you tell them, that's it, that's the only thing out of your pathway, they're probably going to die because they don't have a lot of peers that have done that. And it seems incredibly foreign and not helpful to them from the outset, right? You go, wait a minute, you're going to tell me I got to drive my truck over, park it in front of the mental health clinic where everybody can see it, and then I got to go in and talk to someone and tell them the reason for my visit? And then they're going to take me into a room. We're going to talk about my feelings for an hour to someone who's most likely going to be a female. Like, no, I don't see how any of that's going to be helpful. I'm not going, right? So we've got to give people options. Again, self-empowering them to make choices in their lives. And yes, mental health treatment can be an excellent option for some, but for others, it's peer support. I'm a full-on believer of the power of peer support. It helps the peer, helps the person being helped, cost-effective, scalable, awesome. All right, how do we make peer support a better part of our schools, faith communities, and workplaces? And then accessible, quality mental health services. A lot of people in my work don't know what they don't know. They had a little bitty tiny suicide prevention piece in their graduate school training, really often underneath an abnormal psych class. And mostly what they were taught was, don't get sued, don't get sued, don't get sued. They made most of us incredibly fearful of helping people experiencing suicide intensity, and it doesn't always go well because of that fear. So I tell everybody that I work with, go kick the tires of your local mental health clinic, of your EAP, of your psychiatry supports in your community, and ask yourself, if you're talking to them, do I trust this person to have my best interests at heart? Do I really feel like I will be helped by this person, or are they scared, right? So more on all of those in a longer talk, but let's talk about what this gatekeeper model looks like. All right, many of you are familiar with the ideas of CPR. We all get it. Everybody gets trained. They get trained multiple times. Why? Because if we get a whole community trained multiple times, we're hopeful that if something goes down, somebody's got a heart attack, they're choking, they're drowning, whatever, someone's going to raise their hand and say, I got this, and they're going to move in with confidence and competence and do what needs to be done to sustain that person's life until we can get the appropriate next level of care involved. We all understand how that model works. So we have a similar model on the mental health side. And same idea. We're going to train everybody. We got to train them multiple times on how to start conversations around suicide, how to listen empathically, in partnership and collaboration, and then be a gentle bridge to a buffet of resources, and then follow up. All right? So I'm going to give you some very quick tools on this in just a second, but that's the mindset. In my world, we did some harm in this space because we said, whoa, suicide, no. The everyday person can't handle suicide, no way. That's just for the professionals, hands off. And we made a whole community super scared to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Well, come on, mental health providers, where are we? We're behind closed doors. We've got to empower the community to have these conversations, or we're never going to get in front of it. There's just not enough of us, and we're not on the front lines. We're way in the back. All right, so that's the same idea with CPR. All right, so this really works best. This model doesn't work to help all people, but it really works best when we have what we call double jeopardy situations. People who have a lot of risk factors for suicide who are also least likely to seek help on their own. And how do we engage them in their own environments, because they're not coming to us. The majority of people who die by suicide are male. They are men who have one attempt and it's fatal, and they are men who have never reached out to any kind of mental health services. So this kind of thing usually helps them start to connect around this. Okay, so what do we do first? We look at our nonverbals. We look at the way our body's talking. Remember, you stay calm, they stay calm. We take some breaths, get ourselves centered. We make eye contact if that feels appropriate. We watch and mirror other people's nonverbals to see if they're feeling uncomfortable. We do what we're supposed to do to get them comfortable. If it means bringing them a glass of water or taking a walk, we do it, all right? Then at the beginning of the conversation, we're opening up the conversation. Our goal is to earn their trust. We need to work hard to earn their trust. There's a million reasons why people might want to not talk to us about suicide. We've got to earn their trust, and we do earn their trust when we get them to share stories. So the open-ended part of the conversation is asking open-ended questions. Can you tell me about a time when? I really want to understand deeply what your experiences are here. Tell me more, tell me more, tell me more. We avoid judgment, we avoid advice, because that tends to close down the conversation, and instead we reflect back what we hear. What I heard you was correct. Was this what you said? Sounds to me like you might be feeling this. Is that right? And we check in to see if our reflections are correct. Now, suicide is daunting and scary for most of us. Unless you're on a hotline asking these questions all the time, it always feels awkward. Listen, I've been in this work for a really long time. And if I have an inner circle that's experiencing suicide intensity, I'm still stumbling over my words because it's hard. So there never is a perfect time. And there's never waiting for that perfect moment to ask this question. Just lean in and feel the discomfort and do it anyways. So this is the script that we promote in our trainings. It's kind of a combination of all kinds of other gatekeeper trainings. So this may look familiar for people out there who are doing different pieces of this. Start off with I've noticed. Pro tip. If you ever have a difficult conversation for any issue, Start with I've noticed. It's not judgmental. It puts the facts on the table. I've noticed, right? And then you lay out the behaviors that are concerning or the life circumstances. I've noticed that you're drinking more than you usually do. You're not hanging out with us. Whatever it is, those behaviors. And then you follow that up with, and I care about you. Especially if you're in a position of authority, people are going to feel like they're in trouble. You say, no, I'm here because I care about you. And I want to understand what it's like to be you. Can you tell me a little bit about that? I want to be this person in your life that you can share these things with. Tell me more, tell me more, tell me more. Now, sometimes people are not freely open in this moment, and that's okay. They are weighing the pros and cons of trusting you. Stay the course. Okay, another move you can make is find a shared meaningful experience. You can say something like, you know what, I don't know what you've gone through, but I certainly remember going through hard times in my life. And it was hard. It was tough. Okay, it's not exactly what you're going through, but I have walked a dark road too. All right, after you've gotten a little bit of information, you don't have to wait all day. When you see a few of these dire warning signs of hopelessness, withdrawal, substance use increase, and so on, it's okay to go in and ask that direct question. And the nice way to do it is this pivot statement. At some point in the conversation, you summarize what you've heard, and you say, you know what, I just want to pause for a moment and make sure I got this right. If this is what you've told me, then this is happening, and this is going on, and this is what you're going through, and this is what you're feeling. And then you say, sometimes when people go through those things, sometimes they also think about suicide, right? You open up the door to the possibility of suicide. And then you loft up the question like a softball. I'm wondering, all right? Your genuine wonderment and curiosity tells them that you are authentically interested in their well-being. I am wondering, is this true for you? And in fact, you can even let them know you understand how people can get there. You know, sometimes, if my back was up against the wall like yours seems to be, I would see how I could be hopeless too. Sometimes suicide isn't so much about dying, it's about escaping overwhelming pain. I'm wondering how many times suicide may have crossed your mind, even if it was just fleeting in nature. That's called the gentle assumption. You make a gentle assumption that it's already been on the menu. Now, sometimes people get fearful about this. They're like, oh my gosh, Sally, wow, that might put an idea in someone's head. It's not true. In fact, the opposite is true. If people are thinking about suicide and you talk about suicide with them in this kind of way, that's compassionate and connecting and empowering, suicide intensity goes down, not up. Now, this is in a circle. Why? Because sometimes we got to go around the bend more than once. How does this play out? Well, they could say no, right? Well, how do you know a no is a no? How do you know? Well, we don't know for sure, but we can look for some hopeful indicators. If they say no, but they're grateful that you asked, no, I'm not there yet, but thank you for checking in, that's a hopeful indicator. If they say no, but they are continuing to talk about their problems and they're open to your ideas for support, that's a hopeful indicator. Sometimes they say no out of the mouth, but everything in their body is telling you that they're very uncomfortable. What do you do there? Well, you just check in with that. I know you tell me you're fine, but here's what I'm seeing in front of me. You can't make eye contact with me. You look very uncomfortable. Can you tell me about what that's about? Right? No judgment, just reflect back what you see. Sometimes they might be offended and upset. This is what we're all scared of. Oh my gosh, what if they fly off the handle and they're offended and upset? Well, unless you're in danger of them hurting you or them hurting themselves in that moment, you just reflect it back. You just say, I see my questions upset you. Can you tell me what that's about? You stay calm, they stay calm. All right, sometimes they're not going to give you an answer, right? They give you a non-answer. They give you a story or go off on a tangent. You just come back and say, I don't think I heard an answer to my question. I'm going to ask it again. Sometimes they are legitimately not sure themselves. Suicide intensity is fluid. It increases, it decreases. It's off the menu for a while. It comes back. So they're literally not sure themselves, and that's a legitimate answer. And sometimes they say yes. Sometimes they say yes, and when they say yes, the first words out of your mouth, I don't want to hear, do you have a plan? I really don't. I want to hear, thank you. They just gave you the gift of their trust. You acknowledge that moment. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for sharing that with me. Second words out of your mouth, I still don't want to hear, do you have a plan? You'll get there. I want to hear, I got you. I'm with you. I'm walking with you. However that works for you, some kind of expression of partnership, collaboration, we're in this together. Third words out of your mouth, still, not, do you have a plan? But I have some ideas of things that we can look at together. Sprinkle a little hope in the darkness. One of the traps that we get into around this work is we go into interrogation mode. Do you have a plan? Have you did this? Did you do this? Did you do that? Have you ever did it? And we pull out clipboard counseling notes and we are off to the races in our interrogation. What do people seeking help want? They want connection. They want connection. Remember during this model, they want connection and they want to see some hope that things are going to change. All right? Try not to freak out, okay? Try not to freak out. You stay calm, they stay calm. Try not to hot potato. This is another trap we get into because we're scared. Oh, I can't help you. I can't help you, but that person can. Go see them. And that person says, oh, you have suicidal thoughts? Well, you're going to need to see a specialist. Okay, specialist. Oh, you have suicidal thoughts? You're going to need to go to the hospital. Okay, hospital. Oh, we can only hold you for 3 days, and then you're back out into the community. We're all so scared of you. We hot potato you all the way through. What does that person want? Connection, purpose. We hot potato the heck out of them. And then it's a little paradoxical, but try not to champion a life worth living. It goes something like this. Oh, sweetheart, don't kill yourself, please. You have so much to live for. You have a beautiful family. You have so much potential. Like, don't impose your value system on them. They've got something that is driving so much despair, they're thinking about leaving the planet. Listen to their reasons for dying and listen for their reasons for living. And when they give you their reasons for living, you can go in and fan those flames. But don't impose your value system on them. All right, once you get into a conversation about suicide, it's important to have ideas that are grounded in good reality about what to do next. And so it's helpful to know what your resources are like in the community and that you're not figuring that out on the fly when a crisis is descending. But you've got 5 things in your back pocket, and you can say, you know what, I know what the Lifeline number does, I know what the crisis text line does, I know what our counseling center does, I know what our employee service program does, I know Dr. Joe, he's awesome, I know where the peer support is. You know where these resources are because you've already gone out and kicked the tires, and you know it's trustworthy. And you can then activate the resource in the moment. This is the other thing. You give them a whole long list, a laundry list of things to do. Okay, check out this website, call this 1-800 number. You're going to have to click here and again put on hold for 30 minutes. It's not going to happen. That phone feels like it's 500 pounds. Activating the resource in the moment gets the momentum of the flywheel going. It's the hardest part. And you say, you know what, I have some ideas of things that we can look at together and then offer the buffet. We could look at here, or we could look at here. We could use my phone, your phone. I could be in the room, I could be out of the room. I could start the call, you could start the call. All of these choices matter as people start to feel agency back in their life. And then follow up. Okay, it doesn't mean you have to be all tangled up in someone else's personal difficulties. But you following up can be a reason for living. All right, you say something like, you know what, I'm going to call you again tonight after we've got this plan together on what we need to do. We've reached out to some kind of crisis resource. We've got a plan together. I'm going to reach out to you tonight, just check in, see how things are going. How about we do this again on Friday? Let's go out for coffee or a walk on Friday. I want to hear how these resources worked out for you. I want to check in on what you're doing, how things are going. That not only becomes a reason for living, but you also get to learn whether or not the referrals are working and kind of get eyes on them again. So following up ends up being just like the non-demand caring contacts, a really important step in this process. All right, crisis resources, I know some of you are very familiar with, but this is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. It's one number, routes locally to the area code on your phone. It is answered by highly trained crisis counselors. And in the summer of this year, we're going to be moving to a new urgent care system that's going to transform how we deal with mental health emergencies. Fingers crossed. We've got a lot of work to do, but hopefully it'll be amazing. But right now, this is what we got, and this is going to go on after we move from to 988, which will happen over the summer. We'll still have this lifeline. It'll all go through the same urgent care kinds of ways. 24/7 free. Press 1, you get the Veterans Crisis Line. Press 2, you get a Spanish speaker. They can bring on really any translation. It just takes a little while to find someone who speaks Mandarin at 3 o'clock in the morning. Lots of research coming out from Columbia University on the impact of these resources. The other one, of course, is the crisis text line. You text hello to 741-741. Same thing. Highly trained, supervised crisis counselor comes on the other line to help you create a plan to stay safe for now. All right, last bit downstream. This is how we respond to suicide crises. In a longer session, we would talk about how to reduce access to lethal means. But for most of this part, I'm going to talk about responding to grief and trauma. We've got some of the community's best experts here on the front row. Really glad you're here. Building up a sustainable, comprehensive approach to grief and loss on the Cape and Islands. My brother died 2 weeks before his 35th birthday, 2 weeks before Christmas, and 2 weeks before the Asian tsunami hit. Everybody remember that time? If you're able to remember it, it was devastating, right, to the international community. And I remember 6-7 months later looking back on this experience and thinking about how our family's response to suicide was very much like the international response to this disaster. At first we felt like we were drowning, day and night all mixed up, like everything was totally out of control. And then at some point we had to emerge from that sense of drowning and we had to look around the landscape and everything was different. Everything was moved. Nothing mattered, right? Everything had changed. And slowly, we start to feel the ripple effects going through space and time, and then the aftershocks with each major milestone of birthdays and anniversaries and holidays and so forth. And then all of the special teams that needed to come in and help us rebuild. Mental health teams, faith community teams, workplace teams, and so forth. And so this idea of a tsunami is a very powerful, powerful piece because suicide grief is wicked. It's complicated. As the granddaddy of all things suicide, postvention is what we call it, what we do in the aftermath of suicide death said, people fall into this canyon of why. Frank Campbell, love that quote. They fall into this canyon of why. And they're down there and they're festering in the why didn't they tell me, and why didn't they go reach out, and why didn't they go take their meds, and why? And the longer they're down there because they're not getting any answers, the more we have this domino effect where marriages fall apart and kids drop out of school and people lose their jobs and have their own health crises around it because there's so much survivor guilt. The woulda, coulda, shouldas, if I had only, or if I didn't do the thing, or if I did do the thing. And the fact that for many of us, suicide death is sudden and traumatic. We had life scripts that we were supposed to play into that are gone in a second, and the deaths are often horrifying. And then we can't talk about it because we have all kinds of cultural and religious taboo. And so because of this, it's not uncommon that we see all kinds of complications popping up. Denial, like I can't assimilate this into my reality, so I'm going to make up this whole other narrative to make sense out of it. Anger, right? Anger at the boyfriend, anger at the boss, anger at the person we can put the blame on. All kinds of shame and the push-pull of traumatic grieving. We've got physical reactions. People are already compromised physically, might have panic attacks, might have heart issues. It's not uncommon for the bereaved also to have their own suicidal thoughts from the survivor guilt, from the incredible excruciating pain of the grief, or from the yearning. I just want to be with my person again. And at the same time, you're going to have this oscillating effect from all these difficult things to resiliency and even post-traumatic growth. And all of this can be happening at the same time. So I think we have just like a couple of minutes for questions, and then we will wrap up. So I'll just move to Q&A and see if there are any questions or any comments. I know some of you have a lot of experience in this area, so I'm open to anything you want to talk about. And I don't know about you, but it's about 110 degrees up here. It's a lot. Any questions? And it's okay if you don't. I know this is a very sensitive subject, and sometimes people are like, I'll text you. Well, Mar, I'm going to bring you up before I go to close so you can just share a couple of calls to action around building community and some of the things that are happening in the upcoming calendar.
Okay, so let's give it up for Dr. Sally Spencer-Thomas, folks. I just wanted to say that I'm Dr. Marware. I run the student wellness here, but we are part of the community. We are Cape Cod Community College, And so we want to be part of the hope and the help into the community. We're part of the Suicide Prevention Coalition, and some of our other folks are here from different parts of the Cape. And we just want to know that we care and we're here and we'll do what we can. That's all I got.
All right, last thing. Thank you so much, Mara. We're going to turn the lights down in just a second, but before we do that, I want you to pull out your phones again, and I'm going to ask you some questions once we get the lights down, and if your answer is yes, I want you to hold your phone up above your head, okay? Let's go for lights down, all the way down again. Okay. If you have lost someone that you loved, a friend, a family member, someone in your inner circle, go ahead and put your phones up above your head and light your lights. Okay, look around. Hold them up for a second. Yeah. You all are shining lights of hope in the darkness. When everybody else moves on, it's the survivors of suicide loss who said, my loved one did not die in vain. I will fight with everything I have to make this right. For those of you who have fought your own long, dark night of the soul, or have been that person standing shoulder to shoulder while on someone else's fight, go ahead and light your lights. If you have lived experience in that way, either your own or support of someone else, all right, you are also shining lights in the darkness because you know what it's like to walk that path, and you can say, I understand. Okay, go ahead and drop them out. Now, if you support this cause for whatever reason, go ahead and lift your lights again. Hold them up and don't move. There. Now look around. For those of you in the front, turn around and look at this. Yeah. Now imagine back from the beginning. You're that person in the dark room, and you look up and you see those lights. I have some ideas. I will listen to you. I will walk with you. So the takeaway, be the light. Or bring the light, because light is life. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming out.